You're listening to the Music Book Podcast with your host, Marc Masters.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Music Book Podcast. I'm Marc Masters. Written 2 books about music, No Wave, published in 2008, and High Bias, The Distorted History of the Cassette Tape, published in 2023. On this podcast, I talk to music book authors about how they get from their first idea to a finished book and all the decisions they make along the way. So this time around, I got a chance to talk to Matthew Blackwell. He's the author of Plunderphonics, an entry in the 33 1/3 series of books focusing on specific musical genres. You might remember I talked to Leor Phillips about her entry in that series on South African pop. That's episode number 18 if you'd like to go back and check it out. Blackwell's book is on a movement in music of artists who use other people's recordings in their music without permission, often with the express intent to make a statement about copyright law, the idea of fair use, and so on. Blackwell focuses primarily on 4 artists: John Oswald, who coined the term Plunderphonics, Negative Land, Avalanches, and Girl Talk. But he also covers many more who've played a vital role in the genre, like Evolution Control Committee, the Tape Beatles, and Danger Mouse. Along the way, he weaves discussion of the music and these creators with all the legal issues and entanglements that arise because of their work, and the ingenious ways they respond to it. In the book, he quotes Oswald as saying, "Is a musical property properly private, and if so, when and how does one trespass on it?" And he writes, "This book is about the artists who sought to answer that question, and not liking what they learned, tried to change the system. They did so by creating music that was deemed illegal, responding to lawsuits with daring media blitzes, and educating their audience about their own right to adapt and transform media." By the way, there's a few things in our discussion that you might not have heard about before, and just in case I want to explain at least one of them, which is we talked a little bit about the Negative Land release from 1991 called U2. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a single they put out that had a big U2 on the cover with Negative Land really small, and it's sampled. I still haven't found what I'm looking for, and cut it with some outtakes of a Casey Kasem top 40 radio chatter where he's kind of hilariously making fun and cursing about U2 and their names, and something he never wanted to go public. And U2 sued Negative Land over it, and it was a big saga about fair use and about copyright. And anyway, we talk about that a little bit, but I realized if you hadn't heard about it, you might not know what it was, so that's a little briefing there. If you have any questions or comments about the podcast, email me at musicbookpodcast@gmail.com. You can also message me at our Instagram account, which is @themusicbookpodcast. By the way, a couple episodes ago, I started putting up episodes on YouTube too, because a couple people told me that's the way they listen to podcasts. It's audio only. There's just a picture of the book. I'm not going to put video up there, but I figured if someone likes to listen to it on YouTube instead of those other places, there it is. So here's my talk with Matthew Blackwell. I hope you really enjoy it. So the first thing I usually like to ask is about the origins of the book and the genesis of the idea. Now with this one, it's in a series, so some of it is self-explanatory. You pitched it to the 33 1/3 genre series. But I'm curious, when did you get the idea Plunderphonics would be a good thing to try? And then how did you kind of approach them with it in your pitch?
Yeah, well, I thought for a long time about doing a normal 33 1/3 album
Mm-hmm.
book about John Oswald's Plunderphonic album.
Mm-hmm.
But I never quite pulled the trigger on that one because that album is very weird and there's a lot to say about it, but it
Uh-huh.
doesn't quite fit, I don't think, with the 33 1/3. People go there to read. There's lots of great albums, but it's Patti Smith and Lou Reed and Bob Dylan.
Right,
And
right.
John Oswald's is a little bit too strange, I think, but I had
Mm-hmm.
that idea kind of in the back of my head. By training, I'm a academic and English literature, but my
Mm-hmm.
background is in the history of publishing, so I knew a lot about copyright and a lot about music, and I always had this idea of combining the two. And I was like, man, a book about John Oswald would be a great way to do that, but I just didn't think it would work. And then when they announced the genre series, I thought, oh, okay. If John Oswald wouldn't work, I think Plunderphonics would work. Because you have
Mm-hmm.
John Oswald, but Negative Land and Avalanches
Mm-hmm.
and Girl Talk, and these
Mm-hmm.
people who are a little bit more accessible, right? So, yeah, I sent off my proposal, and I think it was basically what ended up in the book. I think I decided I was going to have like a final epilogue about vaporwave in my proposal. And that
Hmm.
didn't work out because I got to the end of the book and was like, oh no, I can't write about a whole new genre now.
Right,
Right.
right.
And then I thought, somebody else is probably going to do a book about vaporwave anyway. So I kind of changed the epilogue into just a small chapter about, the copyright stuff that has happened
Hmm.
since Talk. And
Hmm.
it turns out I was right. There is a book about vaporwave forthcoming.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
And so I think the first in the, forthcoming titles in this series page at the front of my book, Vaporwave is the
Oh,
first
has.
subject. So I was like, oh, well,
Okay.
thank God I didn't try to cover,
Yeah.
all of Vaporwave in 20 pages or whatever. But
Right.
other than that, the proposal is, basically the book.
Hmm.
And I always knew basically that it was those four artists, John Oswald, Negative Land, Avalanches, and then Girl Talk. And yeah, it stayed the same all the way through.
Cool. Yeah, so that's for people who haven't seen the book yet. The structure is kind of basically 5 chapters plus an epilogue. So you've got those 4 subjects as the main part of 4 chapters, although they're not only things in those chapters. And then you've got a first chapter that's a bit of a history of both the concept of plunderphonics and the copyright issues. And it's interesting you say you know good about the history of publishing and are conversant in that kind of stuff because that was pretty necessary for a book like this. It's really interesting how you balance the artistic aspect of it and the creative aspect of it and people just wanting to like take stuff from other recorded things and use them in their recordings, but also you have to do a history of how has this happened, how has this like been dealt with by the law and by the owners of the music that's getting plundered. And I think you define it pretty well, pretty straight up at the beginning in a very strong way that that's part of the genre. It's not just a genre of sampling. It's a genre of messing with copyright and messing with the idea that ownership or what is the ownership of audio and creative work and all that stuff in a lot of ways, especially Oswald, but Negative Land even more so. Part of the point isn't all necessarily music. It's like we want to fuck with things and we want to see what people. It's even there's prank aspects of it too. So that's kind of a long-winded way of saying was that a an interesting thing to try to balance because they can be two streams. They could be separately. You could just talk about what happened with the lawsuits and with copyright issues, and you could just talk about how John Oswald sampled this little parts of these songs and stuff. So I'm just curious how you approached like mixing those two together.
Yeah, the music part and the copyright part are not at odds, I would say, but in terms of pacing, I had to be careful because everybody that I cover in the book, like you say, are pranksters and they're very
Uh-huh.
smart and they're very driven,
Uh-huh.
but they're also very
Uh-huh.
funny. And so
Uh-huh.
anything that they do is super easy to write and very fun
Right.
to read because
Uh-huh.
the book starts with the justified ancients of Moo driving to Sweden to meet ABBA, but then they get there at 3 a.m. They have the wrong address, so they're they're basically lunatics and causing
Uh-huh.
chaos, right?
Right.
And then you have to kind of do a 180 and start talking about like, well, here's the history of copyright law in America. It
Hmm.
starts in 1790.
Uh-huh.
So what I ended up doing is kind of sprinkling the law stuff throughout the book so that there are little sections in each chapter, but each chapter is really driven by the sort of exploits of the characters, right?
Hmm.
When I talk about Negative Land, I talk about the U2 fiasco first. And I
Hmm.
make sure that, that whole story is sort of told without breaks from beginning to end. And then
Hmm.
at the end, I go, okay, and here's why this is important. This is their thoughts about fair use and the four categories that you have to consider if something is fair use or not. And I talk a bit about other cases, the Two Life Crew case and stuff like that.
Right.
But I keep those kind of isolated, right? The sections that dive into the legal aspects of it. So
Right.
I hope that the reader's never lost about what laws
Hmm.
apply and what the musicians want when they're doing these things. But also I don't want them to be kind of mired in legalese, going like, okay,
Right.
this again,
Yeah, no, and I think you did a great job of it. I think because I mean, it might have. I don't know if you even thought this way, but it might have been tempting to be like, okay, this section about Negative Land is going to talk about how they put all the music together. Then I'll have a sidebar what happened with them legally. But really, that wouldn't make sense because they were fucking with the law. So, it's integral part of their music, and even Two Live Crew to an extent. I don't think they set out at the beginning to get in trouble, but they loved it and they reveled in it, and it helped their music. And so it's just such an entangled thing that you have to kind of approach it so that it's not separated out. And I think you did a great job of it. I think it was really interesting. Although I mean, even though you were pretty versed in a decent bit of law, you probably had to do quite a bit of different kind of research to figure out all these different cases, and especially that first chapter because you're really talking about a lot of smaller things. I love like the Happiness Boys and Break-In Records, like these early experiments that were about radio that weren't like you also talk about John Cage and Charles Ives and James Tenney, but there's some of these people they weren't trying to make experimental music, they just were trying to make like sort of novelty prank kind of radio. And so anyway, all of that has a lot of different legal stuff happening. You must have done a lot of different research. What kind of places did you go to find out all this stuff?
Yeah, the legal stuff was interesting because
Hmm.
basically law journals have all of this stuff in, and it's really funny to look at a law journal that has all of this copyright stuff about patents and trademarks, and then, it says something about Two Live Crew or Negative Land, or it's like, oh, wait a second, these are my people.
Right.
Um, so it was a lot of reading sort of legal articles about copyright from various eras.
Hmm.
And, especially in the late 80s when people were trying to figure out what was happening,
Right.
there really wasn't any copyright cases that had been settled in 88,
Hmm.
89 when Public
Hmm.
Enemy was around and this stuff was starting to be kind of mainstream, but people were like, wait a second, how does this work, right?
Hmm.
So legal articles from that era were very instructive, but also
Hmm.
people like Lawrence Lessig or Joanna Dimmers, who are
Hmm.
legal scholars, but they write for a more general audience about
Hmm.
music and copyright and these kinds of issues. Peter Jassy is another good name. So I read books by these people, and yeah, it was a fascinating mixture because you can really go off on tangents with,
I would think.
because copyright applies to so much,
Hmm.
movies and film and books and everything.
Hmm.
And so trying to find the aspects of it that apply in your case and what doesn't can be challenging. But I love that stuff. I mean, Girl Talk for me, like Night Ripper came out in 2006, right?
Hmm.
So I was a freshman in college, and that was when I was like, wait a second. How is this guy doing stuff? How is he getting
Right.
away with this?
Uh-huh.
And not getting sued. This was the question everybody was asking. But as a freshman in college, that was the perfect time to get into this. 'Cause I'd go to the library and I'd be like, "Excuse me, do you have any books on copyright and music and sampling and stuff?" And so, a lot of these names I was familiar with from before, just trying to figure out like, wait a second, what's legal here? What's going on with Girl Talk?
Mhm.
But yeah, it might not
That's
be to
great.
everybody's taste, but I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's cool. So you came to this with having been pretty familiar with a lot of the artists' work, and you were a fan of a lot of these artists to begin with, even before you conceived of writing a book about them.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think I
Mm-hmm.
started with Girl Talk and kind of worked my way backwards like you do. You're like, wait a second, how does he put like rock and rap together, as a 19-year-old
Yeah.
old what?
Uh-huh.
And then somebody says, well, if you like that, you should check out Double D and Steinsky, which they're also on the same label, Illegal Art. And I was like, okay. And
Right.
then you go, wait, you should check out John Oswald. And then it's like, okay.
Uh-huh.
And then it's like, well, if you like him, his big influence is James Tinney. And so you kind of work your way back
Uh-huh.
through the 20th century. So yeah, that's how I got into this stuff. I was thinking the other day, and I think it's just girl talk. I mean, it
Uh-huh.
sounds kind of corny now because the mashup phenomenon was kind of short-lived, I think. But that Night
Right.
Ripper album was really important to a lot of people, I think.
Oh, for sure. It was huge. Yeah. Yeah. And I remember he used to name drop Oswald a decent. He used to always kind of say, this is who I learned from somewhat, not just him, but like, I always thought it was pretty cool that even when he was getting popular, he would mention, Oswald
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the history of things, and not try to pretend like, hey, I came up with this idea, even though
right.
he
Yeah.
like advanced it and did a lot with it on his own for sure. Did you? I noticed this week that the interview you did with Negative Land guys is on Tone Glow. So obviously
Yeah.
you talked to them for the book. Did you do a lot of original interviews for the book? Because I know a lot of these guys have been talking about it for years. You maybe could have just done it out of already published things, but did you end up talking directly to a lot of people for it?
Yeah, I talked to John Oswald. I'd say that's probably the first like what felt like official research I did was I spoke
Mm-hmm.
to John Oswald. That interview is also on Tone Glow, but it's from a few years
Oh, cool.
ago. And then yeah, I talked to Negative Land, and those guys are incredibly smart and helpful and careful,
Mm-hmm.
and you can
Cool.
tell that they've really thought about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I talked to both Mark Hostler and John Leidecker. And
Mm-hmm.
like you say, that not the full interview, but a lot of it is on Tone Glow. And it's very long. Uh, but I want people to, read half of it, put it away, come back later, read the rest.
Sure.
It's chock full of stuff, so I wanted as much of that out there as possible.
That's
And
great.
then I also talked to Philo T. Farnsworth. That's
Uh-huh.
not not his real name
Right.
for legal reasons. He does not want his real name out there. But he's the head of Illegal Art who put out,
Uh-huh.
like we were just saying, Girl Talk and Double D and
Mm-hmm.
Steinsky and
Mm-hmm.
all those people from about 2000 to 2013. That album was kind of the forefront of this stuff. So I talked to him mainly about Girl Talk, and the sort of latter end of the book is about MP3s and Napster and all of that kind of stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
I spoke to him. Yeah, and everybody was incredibly helpful and smarter than me. So,
Uh-huh.
these people have dedicated their lives to this. So they really are well versed and very well, always on message about exactly what they mean to say regarding fair use and copyright and all of that stuff.
Yeah, and I feel like you got because I've read that whole Negative Land Fair Use book when it came out, and I've read a decent bit with Oswald, but I feel like you got some new things out of them, some interesting new not only tidbits but just their perspective on it now, having kind of even been farther from it and experienced more of it and all that. I thought you got a lot of neat new original things, which I think it made it worth it talking to them originally. Plus, I mean, you kind of want, if you're writing about these guys, you kind of want to have their input just in terms of how they, want to be perceived now and things like that, which I'm probably sure you got the sense of that from them too.
Yeah, Negative Land especially.
Hmm.
I got a couple of fun tidbits. Like there's a bit that I'm not sure that they said elsewhere. They might have put it on social media, but Sinead O'Connor was a big help to them
Oh,
during
right.
the U2 debacle because, I don't know why, but she suddenly took their side and said, you know what? You're going to need some help. So here's my list of publicists, or sorry, my
Uh-huh.
publicist list of,
Uh-huh.
newspapers and magazines all around the world, right? All the
Uh-huh.
press contacts that I have, now you have. And so that's how Negative Land got in the New York Times and the Washington Post,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
all of this stuff was through Sinead O'Connor. So I was like, okay, that's worth knowing. And they
Right.
waited until she passed away to publicize that. And that was a little bit before I was working on the book. So, little tidbits like that were worth it. But also just like looking back on it, there's plenty of interviews with them at the time about how are you going to confront this and what are your thoughts and all that stuff.
Right.
But from the distance of, what is it, 30 years now?
Hmm.
They had a lot of insights about what fair use is now and how it has evolved since then,
Hmm.
especially with AI and stuff like that. These arguments have kind of been twisted. So it was great to talk to them about that. And of course, the AI stuff didn't make it into the book because, like I say, I kind of stopped the book in 2014, 2015 and have a clean break. But
Sure.
yeah, it was for me, it was essential to get their perspective now on what happened then, especially to kind of put it in the context of what happened later, right? Because in the
Hmm.
90s, they didn't know about Girl Talk, of course. So
Right.
now they can reflect on the whole saga, as kind of a completed event.
Yeah, yeah. I always remember that there's a letter, which I think you reference it in the book. There's a letter in the fair use book later where they're like, lawyer just as an aside in one letter says, by the way, if Two Live Crew had happened before you, you guys probably would have been in the clear this whole time. After that whole
Yeah,
saga happened, and then none of it would have mattered if just a little timing
yeah,
had worked out differently. It's all kind of crazy.
yeah,
I
yeah,
also love that tidbit you found about, and I'm not sure if this had been published before, but I didn't remember it, about how part of the reason that the U2 single got such notoriety is because REM's manager found it in a store and sent it
yeah.
to U2's manager. And it turns out some guy had said, "Can you hold that for me? I'm going to run home and get some money." And if he had bought it, who knows if
Yeah.
that's what happened.
Yeah, it's
That
sort
was
of
amazing.
yeah, it's a comedy of errors because that guy just didn't have $10 in his pocket,
Yeah.
and he had to run home. This is before there were ATMs on every corner. And then
Right.
while he was out, Burtis Downs, which is REM's manager, comes in, buys it off him, and goes, "Wait a second, you know, Bono might want to know about this." So he overnights it to Ireland.
Uh-huh.
And then that's why, because what Mark Hostler was telling me is that they could never figure out why that lawsuit happened so fast.
Right.
Because they put the U2 single out at the end of August, I think. And then
Mhm.
within 10 days, they had a lawsuit. And it's like, wait a second, how are they suing us from Ireland when
Right.
this little run of 3,000 copies or whatever it
Uh-huh.
was? How did they even find out about it? And the fact that, it was REM's manager that found it and mailed it is so absurd. And
Yeah.
he told me that Burgess Downs really felt bad. He said, "Oh, I didn't
Yeah.
know it would turn into that." He said, if it was REM doing this, we would have had a meeting and said, what should we do, guys? Like,
Right.
and REM is a little bit more, maybe media literate or a little bit more savvy
Right.
when it comes to this kind of stuff. So he said, I guarantee you that they would have said, you know what, that's fine, let's ignore it.
Right.
But you
Totally.
two, either the band members didn't know about it, which is their theory now, or they said, we got to sort of crush these guys. So,
Right.
so that's what
Yeah.
happened here.
It's all a crazy saga. It's funny too, just because now if somebody did that, it would be on the internet in 10 seconds and everybody on the world would know about it in no time. But back then, the concept that just a couple weeks later, the U2 had found out about this was a really crazy thing. It's not like SSC had distribution in every store in the world and everything like that. But anyway, it's a really cool
Yeah, yeah.
story. But one of the other things I thought was cool about the book is, so as we mentioned before, you structure it around these main four artists and their stories about their records, but there's other stuff in each chapter, and you manage to, especially the first chapter, but throughout it, you kind of weave in like culture side. I thought it was great to get them in. I love them. Tape Beatles, Vicky Bennett, People Like Us. Danger Mouse, of course, but like Evolution Control Committee, all these things, they're all people who are vital to the story of this kind of phenomenon, but didn't necessarily have a big enough story, or just, you couldn't write a chapter about 20 different artists. You had to.
Right.
So how challenging was that to kind of get them in and decide, oh, this would be a perfect place for me to talk about that group and things like that?
Yeah, that was a challenge because I really wanted this to feel like a collective of people around the world doing this and not four brilliant people who sort of independently had the idea.
Right.
And so the tape Beatles, I absolutely wanted to get in because I did grad school in Iowa City, and that's where they're from. For me, it's sort of like, the local guys have made good. Of course,
Right.
they're way before my time, of course, but
Uh,
but they're really important. And like you say, Evolution Control Committee is really important. People Like Us is incredibly important. She's one of the most successful sort of ongoing plunderphonic artists.
mhm.
But it's a crowded field, and so finding ways to get everybody in there was kind of a challenge. What I ended up doing was sort of the book is chronological, going from
Mhm.
the 80s into the 20 teens, but every now and again I kind of rewind a bit.
Mhm.
So to start a new topic, for instance, the avalanches chapter is about the avalanches, but it's really about the sample clearance system.
Right.
And so for that, I kind of went back in time and said, okay, to understand the sample clearance system, you have to know what it was like in the 80s before any of this existed. So that was my way to fit Double D and Steinsky in there, right?
Right. Hmm.
And I have the story of the lesson mixes. And in the
Hmm.
80s, they're trying. They were really doing their honest best to get this
Hmm.
stuff licensed and cleared. And they were going, nobody knew what the hell we were talking about. They were like, what? What is a sample? It's 6 seconds
Right.
long? Why do I care about that? What do you want from
Uh-huh.
me? So I do a sort of, playing with the structure a little bit to rewind and set the scene sometimes. And that gives me an excuse to talk about more people, right? So for
Hmm.
mashups, I rewound, from Girl Talk back into the 90s to talk about Evolution
Hmm.
Control Committee and the whipped cream mixes and stuff like that. So it's a way of sort of cramming people in, but under the guise of
Hmm.
background information that the reader might need
Right.
to have.
Yeah. No, I think it worked really well that way because on the one hand, they don't feel shoved in places. I think it works, but at the same time, doesn't feel like you're just sort of, hey, this happened. Okay, back to, you're giving them some space and you're explaining their backgrounds and why they're worth some time to think about. And I'm curious, I mean, it must have been, there probably were times when you're like writing about Vicki Bennett or Danger Mouse or whatever, you're like, hey, I'm going to write another 100 pages about. So you probably
Oh
had to
yeah.
restrict yourself a little bit too, right?
Yeah, there were lots of great stories that I just had to be like, this is not going to fit. Vicky Bennett is one. I sort of wish I had done a full chapter on Vicky Bennett, but then, like you say, Danger Mouse really deserves a full chapter. But then wait a second, and you can kind of
Right.
talk yourself in infinite numbers of directions.
Right.
There were some things that I wish that not only could I've written chapters about, but they ended up just as footnotes. For example, Too Many
Hmm.
DJs and their album As Heard on Soulwax Radio Part 2. That's
Hmm.
a phenomenal album, and that could have taken the place of the Avalanches chapter because it's similar in terms of their battle to license these, 100 some odd different artists and stuff. And I was like, I started to write this big long section about that. And then I was like, wait a second. Hold on. What am
Right.
I actually trying to say here? And so that ended
Right.
up as a footnote, but
Uh-huh.
ideas for future books maybe.
Right, you only have so much space. I mean, that's part of the idea of the and what I do like about the series and what and works with yours is like there's enough in there for people who know about the stuff already to find out new things, but also they're primers in a way too. So, you're trying to get the highlights of the genre somewhat as much as you are trying to explain what it is. And, you could probably make a book double, triple this length and go into a lot of more things, but that's not the point of the way the series works.
Right, right. Yeah. I had to kind of remind myself that it is an introduction and that, you know,
Uh-huh.
part of me wants to be like, I want to be the definitive groundbreaking, text
Right.
that people will read for 100 years or whatever. But I'm like, wait
Uh-huh.
a second, I have 40,000 words. So
Right,
you do
right.
it. Hold on a second.
Yeah. Well, I think you came as close as you could given those constraints to something that, it's hard for me to imagine that someone's going to someone could write a longer book, but I don't know that they're necessarily going to touch on all the vital stuff gets covered here, which I think is really awesome
Oh,
considering how little space you had to work
thanks,
with.
thanks,
So,
thanks.
yeah.
That's really good to hear. I mean, that was
Yeah.
my big challenge is like just
Mhm.
what percentage of each artist can I fit
Right.
into this, this
Right.
jar that only holds so much.
Yeah. I'm curious, and this is partially a writing question, partially just a question about the way you think about what you were writing. But the interesting thing, and we touched on this a little bit before, is that there's a philosophy here more than like, as opposed to a genre like if it was, say, shoegaze, that's probably not a but great example, or like krautrock or something like that, which those were kind of a time and place and of a musical style, even though they're very diverse genres. This is a musical style in terms of like the technique, kind of, but it's not a musical style in terms of what comes out. I mean, it's so many different, like you're not going to say that De La Soul sounds like the Tape Beatles or whatever, even though they're doing a kind of similar thing. And there's also this idea that like Oswald's clearly a philosopher. Like his
Mhm.
his his music is about music. It's commentary.
Yes, yes.
And to any level, even the most like commercial like hip hop artists, they still are kind of commenting on hip hop, but it's different. It's varying degrees of it. I'm just curious how I think you got that idea across pretty well just by like sort of addressing it when it was there and not necessarily when it wasn't. But I'm wondering if that was something you were thinking about as you were writing it.
Yeah, that was something that at the very beginning of the book, I make sure to make it
Hmm.
clear that, if you go to rate your music and you click on Plunderphonics, there's a
Hmm.
lot of stuff there that I would not call Plunderphonics.
Right.
And I was talking to one of my interviewees about this, and they said, you know what? I don't recognize any of this as Plunderphonics. And
Uh-huh.
if you look, John Oswald's album is like number 50 out of the list of, the top
Right.
most important Plunderphonic albums of all time or whatever it is. And an album by Ground Zero is number one or number two or
Uh-huh.
something. It's like, you
Uh-huh.
know what? I think that this has kind of gotten away from them a little bit.
Hmm.
John Leidecker told me that he sent John Oswald the link to, I think it was a vaporwave page, and he said, "What do you think about this?" And John Oswald was like, "What am I looking at? Like, I don't even know what opinion do you want of me? I don't know what this is." Said,
Right.
"Well, this is kind of what you birthed. Like, this is what it has turned into. What do you think?" And he said, "Well, I
Mhm.
guess you just can't control all the terms that you introduce. It's
Right.
gotten out of my hands. That's all I can say."
Uh-huh.
So anyway, very early in the book, I say,
Uh-huh.
Plunderphonics in this book is
Hmm.
artists who take samples and they purposefully do not clear them, do not license them in order to make a point about copyright and its restrictions,
Hmm.
right? And that's the thing that all the artists in the book have in common. Like you say, a lot of them sound nothing alike. And if you love girl talk, you might hate Negative Land and vice versa. But they
Right.
have this in common, which is that they're trying to make a point about the restrictions that the copyright laws, as they currently stand, impose upon artists, and how the public domain has not moved. It started moving
Uh-huh.
recently, but for a long time it was just stagnant. And how fair use can be expanded, sorry, and all of these things.
Mhm.
So that's the link that kind of ties them together. And for me, that's kind of a more interesting way to think about music than pure sound, because I love the genre series and I've read a bunch of them and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But the thing that interests me is always like, wow, who knew each other? How did these
Mhm.
bands interact with one another? How did they build this into like a movement? How did they make money? What were they trying to say about politics and stuff like that? More than like, yes, they played the guitar in a similar way or something like that.
Uh-huh.
That has its place, but I've always been more interested in the sort of social aspect of music and the fact that really what it is, people get together when they're young and they're like, let's try to change the world somehow, right?
Uh-huh.
I mean, that's what a rock band is when you just sit down and think about it. It's a little naive, but that's what,
Sure.
rock music is. So yeah,
Mhm.
so that's sort of my approach. I don't know if Plunderphonics as a genre matches, the book is going to look different than what you see on, Bandcamp if you click the Plunderphonics tag or whatever.
Right.
But that's what all these sort of artists have in common, I think, is just a sort of single-minded obsession with just changing these laws, changing the way that art is able to be made in the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah, that's cool. And I think it's especially cool to a thing to write about. I imagine you must have liked this aspect of it is that it's like it is a sort of a political art or a socio-political art, but it's not a blunt, it's not protest folk or something. So you don't have to like print Bob Dylan's lyrics and say, see, he was mad about the government or whatever. They're making a music that the subtext is the protest more than the text itself. Although it is, there's times when but anyway, it's kind of fun to, I think, to sort of examine that as a political social statement because it's got some abstractions and it's interpretable in a way.
Yeah, I was talking with Negative Land. I said like, well, why did it work? Why did the U2 single suddenly get everybody's attention?
Mhm.
And John Leidecker had the easiest answer, which was that, well, it's funny. It's a
Right.
funny album. That's it.
Uh-huh.
People like
Uh-huh.
it because it's funny. And so
Yeah.
that really does a lot of the work for me, because I don't have to, like you say, take the lyrics and be like, okay, now this is actually a metaphor about Reaganism.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like, no, it's funny because it's making fun of you too.
Uh-huh.
And you
Yeah.
two got mad and said, you can't do that to us.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's it, you know?
Yeah, and
Where
Casey
does the
Kasem even
government
more so.
fall? Oh,
Yeah.
Casey Kasem more so.
Yeah. Yeah, that part's hilarious. That's always been one of the funniest aspects of it, I thought.
Yeah, I mean that song really is about Casey Kasem more than you two. You two is sort
Right.
of like sort of friendly fire almost because it
Right.
just so happened Casey Kasem was talking about you two during that
Right.
infamous
Yeah,
rant.
I mean, if they hadn't put you two big on the cover with Negative Land Small, they probably you two probably I bet they that was that. But of course, they did that for a reason. I mean, it wasn't
Right.
a coincidence that they happened to make it
Yeah.
kind of look like a new album by you two. But
Yeah.
did you get the sense from it makes me curious now that you're talking about the funny aspect of it? I mean, obviously with most of them there's a prank and fun aspect to all of it, and obviously with Oswald's too, but he's such a kind of a like he also a jazz musician, jazz improviser. He's kind of into serious music. Did you get the sense from him that he kind of gets also that his stuff is funny, or that it's meant to be funny, or is that kind of just like a fun side product of what he does, or what he did?
I think he knows he's funny, but he'll never admit it. He has the driest sense of humor.
Uh-huh.
When I interviewed him, he said that, he plays the saxophone, and he said, recently, I did a concert with a very talented young saxophonist. Maybe you've heard of her. Her name is Lisa Simpson. And I was confused because I was like, oh, okay, this is somebody who I've never heard of, who has
Uh-huh.
an unfortunate name. It sounds like, the
Right.
eight-year-old girl from the cartoon. And I said, I don't know if I know who Lisa Simpson is. And he said, oh, I think that you would recognize her work. She was in a popular program called The Simpsons. And what he had done was he took, the scene at the beginning of The Simpsons where, she plays the saxophone and then leaves school, in
Right.
the intro to The Simpsons. And he sort of had a concert where he played along with Lisa Simpson and did funny things
Uh-huh.
where he had Lisa Simpson played Charlie Parker and kind of played with it and stuff like that.
Wow.
But when he told me about it, he was so his tone did not change.
Uh-huh.
So I think that he knows that he's funny, but he will never let on that he's making a joke
Uh-huh.
or anything. He knows that the Michael Jackson song is funny, but I think that he kind of plays the part as the ultra serious intellectual, kind of to
Uh-huh.
fuck with people a little,
Right.
and see what he can get away with. But yeah, so to answer your question, he's funny and he knows he's funny, but
He's not going
part
to
of
admit
the
it.
reason he's funny is that he forces you to get it. He kind of
Right,
puts you
right.
on your back foot.
Right. One of the other things that's interesting about this music, and I think it came across in your book well, is it's fun to talk about technically. It's fun to talk about like, oh my God, they took 2 seconds from here or they took this, Negative Land took the Reverend saying Christianity's stupid out of context and made a song out of it or whatever. But it's also enjoyable music to listen to me at least. And I think many people who haven't heard it before and might read the book without knowing might be like, is this just theoretical experimentation or is it, but I mean, the Escape from Noise album, I'm quite a bit older than you. It came out when I was in college and it was popular. Like, and I still have a lot of friends who, if I say something from the album, they can recite other things, even though these aren't really songs. So
Hmm.
I'm just curious if you thought if this writing this book made you think a little bit more about why do I also enjoy. I mean, the Girl Talk obviously that's dance music, that's party music, so that kind of makes sense. And the Avalanches have that a little bit of a pop aspect to them too. But even the most dense Oswald stuff to me is fun to listen to. And I wonder if that's something you've thought about much.
Yeah, I think that it has something to do with just kind of wallowing around in pop culture and
Uh-huh.
playing Name That Tune, or in the case of Negative Land, going like, what is that? Where did that come from? Where
Uh-huh.
did they find this crazy preacher saying Christianity is stupid, you know?
Right.
And then the fun for me is like on another level, you
Hmm.
listen to the music and it sounds cool, and you're like, wait a
Hmm.
second, what was that part?
Hmm.
But then another layer sort of becomes available, which is like, I'm gonna track this stuff down, you know?
Hmm.
Now
Hmm.
I'm listening to a weird funk album from the 70s
Right.
because I've never heard of these people before, but it says that the Avalanches sampled them, right?
Hmm.
So I think that the music itself is pleasurable because your brain is trying to make sense of it and going like, how does this all fit together? Where did they get it? Is there
Uh-huh.
a new meaning made between these seemingly very disparate elements? And so it's
Right.
sort of a puzzle that you're trying to work out.
Mm.
But then as a music nerd, it's like, whoa, I want the sample list, you know? That's a
Uh-huh.
cool horn part. I want to go and like find that album too. And then, I mean, with certain of these artists, like you say, they're just funny. I mean, the Tape
Yeah.
Beatles are also very funny. The Tape Beatles work less with really famous music and more with like old weird VHSs you might find at Goodwill or like, you know, just stuff that you would find in a thrift shop or even like a garage sale. And, you know, they're self-help books or old commercials from a taped show on some old VHS.
Mhm.
And so you get like a Pine Sol ad, and then that segues perfectly into Eleanor Rigby. And you're like, wait a second, how does this work?
Yeah.
And so it's moments, it feels serendipitous. It feels like there are connections that are sort of meant to be discovered, but you never would have known it
Right.
unless these artists came along.
Totally, totally. And I love the fact I think you make this connection pretty both implicit and explicit at times. It's like sort of whatever the person is trying to do, there's connections between these different artists. Like the guys who are on the radio doing these break-in records, which I might get the explanation wrong. You might be able to explain it a little better, but they were records for radio where they would say something and then take a bit from a song and have that be kind of the answer to a question. I don't have a good example, but sort of like, you ask a question, then you have Frank Sinatra sing a line from his song that's kind of an answer to it. Strictly just made to make people laugh on the radio, but still quite
Exactly.
experimental and quite, and then but then there's something about this Plunderphonics that even when you take it to the most theoretical level, it's still got that funniness to it just because it's sort
Yeah.
of audacious or playful or,
Yeah, that it's really interesting to sort of, I mean, I've never done this before, but let's compare
mm-hmm,
like the Flying Saucer, which is the famous break-in record where
mm-hmm,
Buchanan and Goodman do sort of a spoof of War of the Worlds. And,
mm-hmm,
you know, one of them is a radio announcer who cuts to the man on the street saying, "Oh my God, the Martians have landed."
mm-hmm.
Interviewing people who, you know, about their reaction or whatever. And of course, the people respond with a tiny little snippet of a famous pop song. Nobody had really done that before. That was
Uh-huh.
1956. And
Mm-hmm.
people were like, wait a second, you know, the record companies got really nervous. Like, where's our cut of this, right?
Right, right.
And so, on the most fundamental level, that was for a laugh. They just thought that that would be
Mm-hmm.
a funny sort of gag to do. And
Right.
then on the other end, you know, the sort of pure intellectual exercise that you mentioned would be like
Mm-hmm.
Plexure,
Mm-hmm.
John Oswald's album from, I think it's 91 or 92, where he takes the tiniest possible samples. I'm not talking half a second, I'm talking like fractions of a second.
Right.
And I mean, it sounds insane. It's,
Mm-hmm.
um, but somehow it has the same sort of like giddy
Mm-hmm.
reaction, which is like, wait a second, all of this, you know, sounds familiar. And I think that the thing that makes both of those records fun is that they're talking back to pop culture. They're saying, let's
Right.
have fun
Right.
with this.
Yeah.
We get sold all this stuff all the time, right? But they're like, let's turn around and make our own stuff out of what we hear on the radio.
Right.
And, you know, in the case of the flying saucer, it's a funny joke. And in the case of Plexure, it's just like, it's puzzling, to be honest, until
Right.
you listen to it a few times and kind of understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that they share is a sense of fun, of play, of like, you know
Mm-hmm.
what? This is what we're sort of inundated with.
Yep.
Let's turn it around. Let's see what we can do with it.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah. It's almost like they're sort of this weird manifestation of your own consciousness when you think about walking through the world, it's like I'm hearing snippets of songs in the grocery store, and I'm hearing, your own brain kind of processes these things in weird ways that aren't linear and aren't necessarily all big one long. So you don't remember the whole song, you remember parts of it and things. And so it kind of reflects that back to us in a weird way, I think.
Yeah, what you learn from Plexure, even if you can't identify any specific song, is that
Hmm.
wow, a lot of songs just sound the same because you have
Uh-huh.
like a heavy metal riff, and then you have
Right.
a piano ballad, and then you
Uh-huh.
have some pop song or something, and
Uh-huh.
you can't quite tell what each part is, which song it comes from, but you're like, oh yeah, that sound is famous, isn't it? That something
Right.
about the timbre of that guitar is famous,
Uh-huh.
and we
Uh-huh.
know it because we exist in it. It's just everywhere all the
Yep.
time.
Yep, yep, totally. You mentioned early on that your what you pitched to 33 and third people pretty much stayed in terms of like structure, and you knew you were going to focus on certain artists. What kind of revision stuff did you go through? Did you write a ton and then go back and edit a lot of it? Did you feel yourself editing as you went? And also, like, after you got it to them, did you go through many passes of doing any kind of changes or things like that?
Hmm. Let's see. So this might get a little in the weeds, but my goal was always
I love it.
500 words a day if I was writing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Research was always separate from writing. You
Sure.
research until you know what you want to say,
Hmm.
and then you write. I have a
Hmm.
friend of mine, Shai Thompson. I want to attribute this to her. She said,
Hmm.
if you don't know what you want to say, you haven't read enough. And if you feel like you have enough to write an essay or a chapter or whatever, but by the end of that essay, you've exhausted what you have to say, that means you haven't read enough. Because you should not say everything you know. You should be able to pick and
Right.
choose in order to make your
Sure.
argument,
That
right?
makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So I read and I read and I read and I read until I knew
Hmm.
pretty well what I wanted to say. And then
Hmm.
I would write 500 words a day. And then I would stop because I'm a big follower of, Ernest Hemingway, I think, said it, which is that you should stop each writing day with something left over for the next day. So the next day you
Hmm.
wake up and you're like, oh yeah, this is the scene and I was finishing this dialogue, right? You should
Hmm.
never exhaust yourself so that the next day you have a blank page.
Sure.
So the writing process was pretty quick because of that, because I was like, you
Uh-huh.
know what? Just try. I'm a horrible inveterate procrastinator. So I was like, I'm gonna try to be consistent and
Uh-huh.
make sure that I have 500 and only 500 words, but every day that I'm writing.
Hmm.
And then after I finished a chunk, I would go through and I'd revise. Usually it was shortening because,
Hmm.
there was just so many fun anecdotes and stuff. And I was like,
Sure.
oh, I really, I wrote, that's such a funny thing that they did, but it doesn't work.
Uh-huh. Right.
And it would usually, unfortunately, in my mind, greatly improve the writing to take all the fun stuff out and stuff. Yeah.
Hmm.
The justified ancients of Moo did so many other funny things on that trip, but I just had to cut them out.
Right.
And then when I delivered the manuscript to Bloomsbury, I had a great editor who worked with me, and her name is Annie. Yeah, she basically did more of the same. She helped me move some things around, which helped with the
Mm.
structure.
Mm.
And then she said, cut more of this goofy stuff because, yes, it's funny, but it's kind of, as a reader, is preventing me from getting to the point, right?
Hmm.
But the best thing that she did was she said the John Oswald chapter used to be chapter one, and the chapter one now used to be the introduction.
Oh.
And she said, "Why is your introduction 10,000 words long?" And I said, "Oh, because we haven't gotten to the main stuff yet. We haven't gotten to John Oswald yet." And
Uh-huh.
she said, "Yeah, but it's a little long for an introduction, don't you think?" It's longer than most of your chapters. So the
Mhm.
greatest thing that she did for me was she said, "Okay, let's make the introduction chapter one, make chapter one, chapter two, and etc. And then let's
Mhm.
move
Mhm.
some of these chunks around so that the
Mhm.
reader kind of knows what fair use is before you get to the big section
All right.
on fair use in the negative land
Mhm.
chapter and stuff like that." So I'd say editing was pretty painless in general,
Mhm.
but it's only because I front loaded all of the work, kind of. I
Sure.
did all the research to make sure like I wasn't writing anything that later I would have to rewrite or explain in a new way
Mm,
or something like that.
mhm, Cool. Oh, that's great. It's interesting because moving chunks around is definitely something that happens, I think, with a lot of nonfiction books. But I couldn't tell that it had happened. So I think
Oh,
that's
really?
a good sign. Yeah, it felt very smooth. Like and not smooth in the way that was, like overly produced or whatever, but like it just I did not feel any places like, oh, this one must have moved at some point, or so
Oh,
I thought
great,
it
great,
came out really well. So
great.
I think it's a really cool book. I really enjoyed reading it and talking. I feel like we could talk about it for another couple hours. There's so many neat ideas and so many interesting artists, and I think it's quite a feat to have done this in such a small amount of space. So I really appreciate you talking to me about it.
Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate your support, and I also appreciate this chance to chat with you. It's always fun when you run into somebody who knows this stuff, like,
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's amazing. It's like, oh, to be there in '87 when
Uh-huh.
Escape from Noise came out, that's
Uh-huh.
that's great.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, it's quite a thing to think back on now because at the time it just made sense. But the only reason I bought it is because I bought everything on SSD.
Oh,
So
right, right,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
so it's like I like the Minutemen and Black Flag. I'm probably like gonna like Negative Land, and then you listen to it, like, what the fuck?
Oh, yeah. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, they really stick out like a sore thumb on SST. Totally.
Yeah, yeah. Which again, of course, became part of the saga later because Greg Ginn is such a complete nut job that.
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah. So, but anyway, thanks again so much, and I hope everything goes great with the book.
Oh, great. Thanks for having me.
The Music Book Podcast is produced, edited, and hosted by Marc Masters. Our theme music is by the great band Savak. Our logo was designed by Walter Carlton. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave a rating and a review wherever you hear it. And thanks so much for listening.